I just now watched the end of Legion. I've seen the entire series, and that was the series finale. That was the last episode. There will be no more of Legion. And I hated it. I really hated it. I hated the entire third season. Um, Watching this entire season and looking back at the entire series, I got very much a Lost vibe from it. And what I mean by that is, when Lost, the TV show, started, it was like, oh, all this weird stuff's happening. Where does it all mean? How does all these pieces come together? And then later, after the show was over, it was revealed that they were making it up episode to episode. There was no grand plan. It was very much just weird stuff for the sake of throwing in weird stuff. Like, what would be cool to shoot? What can we shoot? What weird thing can we have to happen? There was no plan. There was no overarching goal. So anything you take as foreshadowing is nonsense. It was just, if something synced up with something on later on, it was purely a coincidence. This is going to be very spoilerific. If you haven't seen the show, don't watch this video, I guess, if you'd like to see it. Otherwise, I really hated the third season. The first season was great. I loved it. And the thing that kept me going through this entire first and second season. Even the second season I loved. But the third season I hated. Absolutely hated it. I kept waiting for stuff to get better. And I knew there were only 8 episodes, so I knew it wasn't going to get way better. And then it was just utterly disappointing. This was very disappointing. And that's a whole thing. Shadow King kills David's sister, murders her. And Oliver says to the Farouk, Amal Farouk, and he says, I'm going to kill you. And Farouk is just utterly dismissive of him. And it's like, I'll even give you a hint how I'm going to do it. And he goes, what is 1 and 1? And Farouk is like, I'll bite. Does this sort of I'll bite gesture. 2. He goes, no. And it was such a cool scene. I was like, oh, wow. So Oliver is going to be the one to kill him or be involved in killing him. And that's like just a cool setup. Like, what does that mean exactly? It's so evocative. Like, ooh, they're like, I can't wait for the cool execution of this. There is no cool execution of that. Nothing like that ever happens. Oliver doesn't kill him. The Shadow King doesn't even die. He doesn't die at all. He just becomes a good guy who has children whose minds he's hollowed out and put his prisoners in. He holds his prisoners in other people's minds. So he has this whole group of children who are just prisons. And it's the most horrible thing ever, and we're just going to live and let live. It's perfectly fine. We're not going to fix that. David's sister is murdered. It happens in the second season, and at some point, we just gloss over the fact that it ever happened. At some point, we just decide that Amal Farouk isn't the bad guy after all. The guy, and he does all these horrible things, and we just don't care. We're only concerned with the bad things David did, because David was the bad guy. And because they've decided that the protagonist that we're following, that we care about, is just the bad guy, and irredeemably the bad guy. At the very last episode of Season 2, Farouk tricks David into torturing Oliver. David thinks Oliver is the host, the Shadow Kings, who's like going to torture him, but he isn't there. And for some reason, Oliver doesn't say that, hey, he's not in me anymore, he's somewhere else. For some reason, he can't say that. I don't know why. I guess to make David seem more evil. And then the idea is he's in Melanie Bird. So Farouk is possessing Melanie Bird and has her talk to Sydney and convinces Sydney that David is pure evil. Now, the premise of... Okay, let's go through this. So the Shadow King convinces Sydney Sidney Barrett, the person who loves and trusts David, and who David loves and trusts. There was an entire episode where they went through her entire past. He went through it over and over again, trying patiently to understand what she was trying to show him. And her big lesson was love can't save us. Okay. And then she's convinced that David's evil and that only by killing David can she save the world, and that he's a bad guy after all. So she goes and tries to murder him, shoots him in the head, and would have successfully murdered him, except Lenny takes a wild shot and the two bullets collide, knocking both of them out, causing a sonic thing that knocks both of them out. The fact that Farouk tricked David into torturing Oliver, tricked Sidney into shooting David, and that Sidney tried to murder David is gone. It's never spoken of again. We never mention it. It never really comes up. And the entire third season, every time Sidney's like, David's just a horrible person, I'm like, and the fact that that's not acknowledged is just sort of building up in my head till I'm getting to this point where we're getting close to the end. I'm going, bitch, you tried to murder the dude. You tried to murder the protagonist who was trying to kill the man who murdered his sister. And Farouk murdered his sister for no good reason. There was never any reason. I mean, once again, it builds up as though he's this mastermind with some master plan. And why is this a problem? Because it feels like such a letdown. It's like all this foreshadowing, no, it was just nonsense. It doesn't mean anything, and a lot of the things that we saw are just discarded as meaningless. Some of them are, like right after Sidney tries to kill David, David erases her memory of trying to kill him, and then they eventually have sex. Sidney interprets this as, you drugged me and had sex with me. And I'm like, yes, erasing your memory when there was clearly a conflict between the two is a bad thing, perhaps unforgivable. But murder, attempted murder, isn't even, David even doesn't bring it up. It's like, yeah, she tried to shoot me in the head. He hadn't done anything at this point. And if that's true, if everything we've seen is true at this point, because there was a time travel thing with future Sidney, who has only one arm, who disappears at some point, we never see or hear from her again. If that's true, and all of that is true, that Sidney actually came from the future not to warn them about Farouk, but to actually warn them about David, that means that Sidney was lying to him, future Sidney, the entire time. She was lying to David every moment she was in the future space with him. Every time she was trying to seduce him, she was actually seducing him to use him, to control him. For what ends, it doesn't lead anywhere. We just forget about it. And the only time this is mentioned again is when Sidney meets up with David and goes, you know, Farouk tricked me. We've both done bad things. And I'm like, okay, we're going to explain this. We're going to all confront this. And this is cool because that actually, if she takes the high ground, that forces David to take the high ground or at least acknowledge it and da-da-da. Very good development. Nope, it was a trick. She was just trying to trick him so she could murder him. So she could try to murder him again. And then we see several scenes at the beginning of this season where she does actually successfully murder him, but due to a time traveler on David's side, Switch, the time traveler, rescues David. She kills him twice in that episode. And it's like, which bothers me a lot, because Sidney doesn't have any fighting powers. That's how you made the show. That's just how you're going to do it. You didn't retcon her into having a more interesting power. She doesn't have fighting powers like one of the Carries does, like female Carrie, who's an excellent fighter. So having her fight diminishes the fighting prowess of the other character, who does have fighting powers. At one point, David's mom says, "Oh, you're like gods." I have no idea why she would say that. She never witnesses Sydney having any powers, because her powers are useless in that situation. And then all Carrie does is fight some guys, fight some time demons, and she doesn't seem to have any powers other than she's a very good fighter. So that doesn't really make any sense. And it's just a lot of it is troublesome to me. It's very weak because it came to no real conclusion. The strength of the show is that all the mutants we see have weird or kind of useless powers, or powers that are very difficult to articulate or define. And instead of building on that, it just diminishes from it, where they can do whatever, whenever, except it doesn't matter, and things that have built up don't matter. We don't bring them up or talk about them at all. David's the bad guy because that's the theme we wanted to throw in the end of it. We never have a Sydney recant her only love can save us, love can't save us, and maybe say only love can save us. And at the very end, this show ends with, after everything I've just mentioned, the very last scene in this, Sydney and David are side by side, and they are going to fade out of existence because they've changed the past and the future is going to be different. And the last moment, it's like there's nothing else. They're both going to cease to exist, this version of them. And even then, she doesn't forgive him. It's like, I'm like sitting here thinking, bitch, you tried to murder him like 3 or 4 times. This is a guy who trusted you, who at the time when you tried to murder him had done nothing to you and nothing wrong. But she was just going to murder him anyway and not forgive him in their last moments of existence. And I'm thinking, God, what a bitter bitch. And this was a character I liked for 2 seasons. And I'm like, God damn it. So this short season where we just forget everything, nothing matters, nothing we saw, there's no continuity. I just don't care. I was so on board with this show for 2 seasons, and this 3rd season sucked. I just hated it. It had a bunch of cool ideas I thought were executed very poorly. It wanted to make this, let's make peace not war sort of theme at the very end, and it did it so poorly because we've had 3 seasons of Amal Farouk really being fucking evil, like just murdering people, turning people into fish, having them drowned, murdering David's sister. I mean, and like we find out, even in this season, he like put people into other people's minds in this creepy, horrible way, and it was terrible. I normally review stuff with this sort of, what are the odds you'll see it and not like it? Huge. I have heard a lot of friends like getting sick of this show, like, because it's aimless. It's not going anywhere. Nothing means anything. So you can't follow it. There's no continuity. So the odds you'll see it and not like it, pretty damn good. I'd say at least 2 out of 3. 2 out of 3 people, I think, would see this and just be so bothered by it, this entire series. And do I want to see it again? No. Actually, near the end, I was actually... Amazon has a thing where you can skip ahead 10 seconds. When they were going nowhere and doing nothing, I kept skipping ahead because I was like, at this point, I just want to get to the end. There's clearly not going to be a good resolution to this. I kept hoping it would. It didn't, so it's like, oh, fuck this. And at the very last scene I saw, I got pissed off. So I don't want to ever see this again. If I do, I'll watch the first 2 seasons, which I liked. This season sucked, and it was a terrible ending for what was a cool and weird show, than the kind of cool, weird kookiness that I would normally like. I think that's all. Boy, am I not happy with this. That's all.